Bloop, bloop. That's a good way to start a broadcast. Bloop, bloop. That was a good. That video did cheer me up. I gotta be honest.
You sound like a real moron.
Yeah. Yeah. That's idiotic. So as was listed in the topic of this video, got thinking a lot today about how there's sometimes, I think, an uneasy truce between people. We have relationships with people sometimes that are actually tenuous because we don't share certain ideological principles in common. We may actually differ quite drastically, and sort of everything's okay as long as we don't topics. But if we do, it's potentially a deal breaker, and I think it has more to do with in-group rather than out-group, right? So if you are if you're a Christian, there's a lot of things you can say that you're going to be safe saying because you've got agreement. Similarly, if you're sort of a left-leaning secularist or whatever, but if you happen to hold views that are outside of the normal ideological stance of most of the people in your group, you really stand a good chance of being ostracized or having relationships blow up in your face and that sort of thing. And in some ways it's a bit of a downer, to sort of look across your life and realize, outside of maybe some of your very close friends who you do share a lot of those things with, that a lot of those relationships may be tenuous. They may come unraveled if you really did get to the meat and potatoes of what you really believe or think. So that's sort of where my head's at today.
Well, it's always true, or certainly it seems true to me, that in-group hatreds, in-group fights are always so much worse than in versus out-group fights. Or at least it feels that way when you're watching them.
Right. And I mean, I would suppose in some ways there should be a difference between dealing with issues like boots on the ground versus dialogue, right? I mean, I would sort of feel like the dialogue, especially here on YouTube and Google Plus, is where we come to hash out these ideas. But you can still get that ostracism, you can still get that in-group attack if you start expressing ideas outside of the norm of that group, right?
Certainly, it's just like, if I made a video, it's just like, oh, wow, Deepak Chopra was really smart to say this. This is a great quote from Deepak Chopra. Whether the quote is great or not, I'm still going to get stumpy.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, whether the quote is good or not. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it also has somewhat to do with this whole subjective versus objective thing that you're on about. Like a lot of atheists, I've noticed, like because it's objective morality to be that Christians present and theists present, they're against objective morality just on that, and don't even think about subjective to think about objective morality. And so when you go, no, I think objective morality actually exists, you're going against what they think of what you should think as an atheist, and it causes a problem. And it sort of reveals that that they're not really thinking about their position when they start doing that. They're just agreeing with a label and they're agreeing with a conclusion without realizing how to get to that conclusion. And that how to get to the conclusion is the important part. And that's why we disagree on the in-group stuff.
Right, and that's a good point. And I will say, actually, I was expecting a backlash for when I made the morality videos. I did not get as much of a backlash as I had expected, actually. But there was a lot of that in-group automatic thinking, I think, that you're kind of referring to there, that I did experience for sure.
Did you get a lot of backlash on your Stephen Morneau, whatever his name is, video?
Yeah, I did. And it's unfortunate because a lot of it is your typical non-thinking backlash, right? that guy's just batshit crazy. I really am. I'm really cautious when I see anyone who's willing to dismiss an entire person, right? And I mean, somebody said something about, even a deaf, dumb, and blind monkey finds a banana once in a while. Is that the Molyneux logic you're referring to? And it's like, well, I mean, you can't get less charitable than that. But um, there's no such thing as someone who's just completely wrong on all accounts. I mean, there's usually something there that one can learn from. Even heck, sometimes you can learn from the bad arguments too. So I'm a little bit leery of someone who wants to just dismiss somebody entirely. And there was some sort of knee-jerk, non-thinking type of responses.
Well, like the laws of thermodynamics are complete and utter bullshit according to what we call laws, but that does not mean that there's not actual good information there if you use them within like what you would normally use them for like engineering and shit like that. But if you're talking about them as scientific laws, they're not actually laws. So there's stuff like that.
Right. Hello, George.
Let's see.
Well, Mike, you made reference to the fact that you've had kind of a realization. What do you think that realization means for you, and what is it? How's it taking you forward, I guess, from what's going on for you recently?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I think I've got a lot of thinking to do. It's not something that I've never thought of before, but I don't think I've really thought of it in the context that I did today, because I've only been on YouTube for a year and a half or something now making content, and for a good portion of that period of time I was doing the in-group, I was in the in-group, right? I was doing the in-group thinking, and so the stuff that I was saying about presuppositional apologetics and that sort of thing, I'm getting all up thumbs on my videos, which is that's great and wonderful. And I always knew, in fact, I hinted at dealing with morality and some other things last year and never did. And so I suppose that's more of a trip into going against the in-group than I've ever done in my personal life, for real. I mean, for instance, I run a business. I would say probably at least 80% of the people that frequent my business are Christians or Jehovah's Witnesses, or some form of Bible-believing religious people, and I think it's kind of a secret to all of them that I'm an atheist, that I'm not one of them. And so in some ways, the YouTube stuff is a little bit more honest, actually sort of coming out as an anarchist or as an atheist or as libertarian or many other things, right? So there's probably...
Isn't there some kind of level of acceptance in the YouTube community that there are going to be so many differences by now that although there might be in-group, out-group thinking, isn't there a realization that all us babies and rocks are atheists and we're going to feel differently about every conceivable issue?
Well, there might be, but the problem is I think that there should be, and there might be. The problem is people are not always willing to let their pet ideology or whatever be passive enough to hear someone else out, right? And so you get a lot of, I mean, all you've got to do, if you look on that video I did about Molyneux and Thunderfoot, if you look on that video and see some of the comments about libertarianism and stuff like that, I mean, it's not charitable in the slightest. I mean, some people are being pretty awful rude. And so, is that really discourse? Is that really an acceptance that there are going to be people with differing viewpoints? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and keep in mind, a lot of these people, they take a label on and they identify it. So when you challenge it, you're challenging their entire identity rather than an idea associated with a label or a concept. You're challenging them as their being. It's like, no, you don't exist like that. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and conversely, they think that they can attack you similarly, right? They're projecting that onto you as well. So someone might make a comment about, if I reference Stefan Molyneux in a video about morality, someone might make a comment derogatory towards Stefan Molyneux is somehow attacking me by doing that, when I don't really have a dog in that fight. I don't particularly endorse nor tell people to stay away from Stefan Molyneux. I've used some of his information, and I think the same thing with ideologies too. People think if they can attack your ideology, they're somehow attacking you. It's a personal attack, right? It's just a veiled one.
Yeah, well, it's not only that. When they disagree with you, or you disagree with them, they sort of see you as a disassociating with that identity, so you're no longer part of the in-group. This sort of happened with Live Life a while back, where he was talking about how he thinks that theists are insane, or not insane, but crazy, or whatever the terminology he used. And when he did that, he was actually correct in what he was saying. I'm not sure how he came to the conclusion he was saying, but he was correct in the conclusion. But the thing is that people were so bad-mouthing and attacking him. It's like he had to recant his position to rejoin the group and retake his position inside the group. And if he didn't, he would be part of that out-group from now on. And it's kind of a terrible thing.
Yeah, that's a what's the phrase I keep using lately? Tyranny of the majority. It is kind of a control.
I would have to point out that lots of people had other axes to grind with Live Life long before that happened. So
probably.
Oh.
Bloop bloop.
Stop it. You're fired.
We better stop with the bloops. That's not gonna do well.
But this has been coming up in the last year or two quite frequently, where the Atheism Plus crowd, the Theists Are Insane crowd, what is the definition of atheism? I mean, there's been all these little splinterings. I don't know how long you guys have been checking out YouTube.
How important do you think those are, Dirk, though? I mean, I don't think they're that important, at least in terms of the post-Hitchens atheist YouTube world we live in.
Well, I think it's important because, like, in some of those things, it kind of, like, it shows your thinking. If you disagree on this subject or that subject, then there's some fundamental thing that's going on there, and because one side is ignoring the reason and logic, or the information, or something's being ignored there. That shows part of that person's personality. And if it's a whole group thing, it becomes hugely problematic for a whole group to ignore something, especially when that group is promoting not ignoring information and using logic and reason.
May I butt in at this point?
Come on in, baby.
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah, George, we can hear you.
Okay. I strongly disagree with a statement like, when somebody disagrees with you, there's something fundamentally different in their mentality or their approach to life or whatever. And this talk about in-groups that I've been hearing, you know, I just joined, not sure who invited me, but glad to be here. And thank you, whoever. But I actually kind of make a point of disagreeing with those people who I am perceived to be most likely to agree with. And this is not because I've got some kind of, trolling personality. It's an attempt to refine the discussion, saying, you know, wait a minute, what about this consideration? And
we're not talking about devil's advocacy here. We're talking about just
well, no, I'm
disagreement.
not talking about devil's advocacy either. I'm talking about a genuine disagreement in the specifics of a case, not saying, oh, I'm taking the opposite view just to, as I say, not, you know, just to be contrary, and not even just to say, well, what if this crazy thing? No, what I'm saying is I see it a little bit differently, and here's why. And yet, too many people with too much concern about, a need for absolute agreement in order to be part of the in-group, don't like that.
Well,
You know, so I'm saying, like, yeah, you know what? I 90% agree with you, but I think you're off on this subject. And here's why I think you're off on this subject. And then a whole lot of people, some of them are just plain taken aback because maybe I tend to be a liberal.
let me ask you this: like,
yeah.
if you have a disagreement,
Mm-hmm.
what are the possibilities of why that disagreement exists?
One, well, let's look at political disagreement as a common thing. When we get into the realms of politics, you can have two people take an exactly opposite approach to things like, let's say property rights, as an example. And you can't really prove that one is right and the other is wrong. They both have equally valid concepts behind them.
Okay,
and
let me
so,
stop you there for just
yeah.
a second. Okay, when you have something like, say, global warming, for example.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have a goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Yeah.
a way that you can achieve that goal, and there's a most efficient way to achieve that goal. Is there not?
No, that's now you brought up a really good one there. That's a really good one. I happen to believe that the most efficient one, and many Republicans did before 2008, that cap and trade was a good thing. Now, does anybody need an explanation of cap and trade?
Well, that's not important to the point at all.
No, it is. I think it is. Cap and trade, I think, is what you believe is one way of getting towards the solution, right or wrong?
No.
No?
If
It doesn't matter. It's completely tangential.
If I may,
to the
right
target.
quick here, gentlemen, I think
Yeah.
I can move us along here and help us out.
Sure.
I would like to ask you, Dirac, I think people can, given the same information, reach different conclusions honestly and without a defect in logic or reasoning. Do you think that's not true?
How? If everyone is exercising logic, which has the same rules, how would someone come to a different conclusion giving the exact same information? Other than if they're lying. There's three possibilities.
You're very close to saying there's only one right way to do things.
No, but there is a most efficient way to do things.
Efficient? Do you know the history of that word, young man?
Yes, I do.
How the Nazis were efficient? Efficiency is not a goal. It's not a worthwhile goal. It's a noble thing. It's fine to be efficient, but if efficiency is at the top of your list,
And you don't know which is most efficient until you have tested.
Yes, but that's a matter of information, not a
No,
matter
it's
of
not. It
efficiency.
requires testing.
Yes, if
And
I test,
so
I'm adding to my information.
I say, let's test it this way, and you say, let's test it that way.
And why would you think that another way is better to test than what I
Let me,
say?
let me, let
Oh,
me give
come
you an
on
example.
now. The very
No,
basis of
no,
science
because
is
that's a
testing.
different information there.
Do you think people can come to, for example, I'm not trying to bring this issue up, but on the issue of capital punishment, do you think people could come to reasonable, logical conclusions that would differ from each other?
I do.
What
I
are you talking
think they
about?
could.
Well, what are you referring to with regards to capital punishment? Do you mean as what we should do with capital punishment?
Yes. I mean,
Yes,
if you're
because
saying
there's a
there's
reasonable
one
way to
right way to
handle
think
that.
about this, and there's a logical way and an ethical way to think about all this, and an efficient way, then,
Well, no, you're
I
just
mean,
disassociating that there's a difference between having an emotional reaction versus having a logical reaction. I might think that uh, going out and hitting someone upside the head that wrongs me that's perfectly understandable. It's not logical or ethical to do.
Well, that's simplified. What
it's
about the capital
understandable but not
punishment?
logical. It's obviously not ethical, but it's understandable but not logical. Okay. Well,
Because we
I mean,
understand, we
I
know
just asked you
that
the question. Do you think people?
it's because
Do
we
you
know
understand that
that we
people
have
come
basic
to?
animal instincts. We have those desires to protect. We have emotional things. You can't just dismiss that. So it's
I certainly would
understandable
not,
for
but
you to have that different reaction like that. It's not. It doesn't mean that that reaction is logical or it's the right action to do. It just means it's understandable that I can understand that you took that action and
Uh,
where you're coming from.
Durakin, I'm sorry, but you've changed the subject. The subject was capital punishment.
Yes. I mean, I did want to get back. Thank you. I mean, I can understand why people, logical and reasonable people, could have differing views on that controversial subject. For example,
Hmm.
Why? There's only really one logical answer to that. If you're talking about crime, then what you're talking about is the law just or not? If it's just, then it's a logical. You're building on a logical system, right?
Is the death
So,
penalty just?
so if the law is just, then the result is that you're dealing with mental impairment, and those people should be treated as though they're sick, which they would be if the law is just.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. The law, you're saying the law must, okay, so you're talking about the case where the defendant says, I killed him. You got me. I tried to deny it, but you caught me. Yeah, all the proof is there. Now, well, you know what? I was crazy. Is that what you're saying? That
I think I
every
understand what
murder
you're saying,
then?
Direct, when you say that obviously there's something wrong, there's something not right, something has gone terribly wrong for you to want to kill somebody or beat up your girlfriend and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, these are common actions,
Hmm.
and it's just like George said. If if you mean I can go hit Jason Burns and just have 6 months in an English sanitarium? Ooh, you're kidding, man. You're kidding.
Well, no, if someone is somehow crazy or whatever, there's something wrong with the mental process, then there's someone sick, and you could treat them as someone sick.
Yeah.
But
And most laws allow for that, and yet at other times they say, no, this person was in possession of his faculties. He went ahead and did it anyway. Now we are justified in killing him. And so, do you agree with that?
no, because the laws are actually unjust in America and around
Well,
the
see,
world.
now
So
you're off on a whole nother subject, aren't you?
No, no,
yes,
no,
it is. That's
no, no,
why I
no.
was
He's not.
avoiding it,
He's
because
not.
this has nothing to do with the actual topic, which this is a tangent of.
What is the topic?
No, no, he's not off the topic. The topic of whether capital punishment is,
Well, no, the topic is actually ideology and relationships, not
Thank you.
capital punishment or any of this other stuff.
Thank you.
right. Well, I was saying that if you think there's only one correct way to do things, We were just saying that people could come to a different conclusion.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that there's only three possibilities within a situation. It's either you're misinformed, there's something wrong with your mental faculties, whether you're too slow to get to that point, or you don't have the algorithms inside your head to make the associations, or even maybe wrong is the wrong word. Maybe they're just different. We have brain chemistry and all like that, so it'll generate slightly different variations, or you're lying about it.
There is a drought here in California, a severe drought. Are you aware of that?
No.
Do you know that Californians have been arguing over the distribution of water, most of which actually comes from out of the state via rivers, and the farmers want their share of the water that they feel is absolutely essential for them to grow their crops.
Yes, because there's different information there.
Listen, if the farmers get all of the water that they believe they need in order to grow the crops, and California is the breadbasket of the United States right now, vegetable-wise anyway, then the city folks don't get their water to showers and wash their cars and water their lawns and stuff like that. Now, I could come down on the side that, you know what, as an efficient way of handling the water problem, yeah, give the farmers every bit they need, but not more than they need. And tell the city folks, you know what, maybe you need to move out if there's not enough water to support the city anymore, because the farming is more important to the overall economy of the United States, the world, whatever. That might be the logically perfect solution.
But you won't get elected to enable it, will you, George?
Right, exactly. Because where do most of the people live? In that city. And they're going to demand their water. So, yeah, this is a case where democracy and et cetera can lead us astray. But there's still this question. It really comes down to, can you measure exactly how much the farmers need so that they don't get a drop more, and then whatever's left over goes on to the cities? And then when you've got that worked out perfectly, and then another drought comes along and there's even less water, you've still got basically political, and they're not even ideological, solutions to a problem. And you can justify either one. And that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Maybe in the short range you can, but I really doubt that in the long run. And I could make a long argument for that, but I don't really think that this would be the proper place for us.
So what else is going on with you, Mike? You're ignoring your hosting duties with Swamp.
Well, no, I was trying to be as lenient as I could here and let you guys explore some things, but I would like to get back to the topic and just ask you guys in your own personal lives how I guess honest, for lack of a better term, you've been able to be with your particular beliefs and the people that you know, and also, of course, relevant to that is, are you mostly in group, or are you exposed to a lot of people that you would not be considered to be your in group, and how does that differ between the honesty you can have with the people that are not in your in group versus the honesty you can have with the people that are in your in group, but whom with you may actually have some really serious disagreements on particular points?
Well, as I personally have said, I don't approach anything with a desire to join or remain in a particular group. I use the phrase, anarchist in my own view on things. I'm not anarchist when it comes to the concept of governments, but I am anarchist in a kind of way that I will not conform myself to fit a group. I just won't do it. I will state my piece, you know.
Well,
That's me.
I don't do that either. I'm probably sort of, I would consider myself to be a bit of a lone wolf, but that doesn't stop you from inevitably becoming part of a group to some degree. In other words, even if you are part of this sort of the great debate here on YouTube, you sort of become part of a group whether willingly or not. But
Oh,
if,
yeah.
for instance, and a lot of assumptions are made, right? It's assumed that
Mhm.
you share a lot of these sort of typical secular beliefs, typically sort of more liberal in a lot of cases, and
Mhm.
so when you come out as saying, no, I'm someone who actually does not share
Yeah.
this particular belief, how
Mhm.
how are you treated then by that same in-group, right? Regardless of whether or not you've self-identified as part of that in-group.
Oh, let's see. I've been called a coward, a liar, a commie, a traitor,
I
and
can
all
actually
kinds of
give
things.
a perfect example of that within like this within the Google Hangout sphere. Whenever you're talking about the Great Debate or whatever you want to call it, um, it's assumed that the sides are Christianity versus atheism. Recently, there's a group trying to and a Google group that is trying to come together, and they're polytheists of Hellenistic origins, of Norse origins, of Wicca. And I ran across one, and he thought it was kind of funny, but he also felt somewhat uncomfortable because within the atheistic circles, we talk about, we use the word woo, and that came across to him as being offensive and dismissive.
It
And
is.
we're doing this, and we're not realizing it. We're just assuming that because they're not holding standard monotheistic, Abrahamic, faith-based stuff, that they must be an atheist. And we're not even thinking about what their actual beliefs are.
And actually, both sides do that, right? Christians and atheists alike will say that an atheist is someone who rejects the supernatural, and that's just not the case.
Oh, yeah. There are many arguments. This goes back along that lines. Is there one right answer? Is an atheist only a person who does not believe in anything in any way spiritual, or is an atheist one who is anti organized religion? Both can be logically supported.
What do you
Maybe a
mean?
little harder to prove that there is any spirituality, but certainly, again, you can't prove there is no God. So
Well, you're
there
talking about
is no
definitions. You're talking
perfect
about
answer.
semantics and using the definition to say whether it's logical or not. It doesn't matter whether it's logical or not if you're applying a different label. If you're using the same label to apply to different definitions, then you're just confusing the thing and the conversation. It really doesn't matter what you're using for the label. Like this whole thing of atheism is someone who lacks a belief in God, which I wish Ozymandias was still here, because this is one of the things that he comes up on, versus, atheism is someone that rejects God. I think that there is an obvious difference within the thinking there of someone who rejects versus someone who lacks, because you have to be presented with the information. So there's a slight different classification there, and that should be noted, but it's hardly never ever noted, and that's a semantic difference to say that they're both atheists, or one is an atheist and one is not. Like you could have atheist means lacks belief in God, and then there's a subcategory within the atheist community or terminology to mean rejection or rather just lacking. I mean, there should be that classification there, but we're not going to do it because it's hard for semantically to do. We just like arguing about it and being pedantic.
I don't know. Does it depend on the subject at hand? I mean, you know, do we have to positively define what we are in order to belong to the group? Is that what you're saying or not saying?
No, it's just a matter of labeling things. If you're going to, that might actually be a thing that splits a relationship. Is like, I think atheist means that you have heard the claim and then you reject something. Well, if that's my position, then I must have some. To hear the position and then reject it means that there's some thinking involved.
Yeah.
So, versus someone that has just like heard it, not heard it, and is just not it at all. That would cause a collision, and because you're not really talking along the same lines, and from that conclusion, you're building off of assumptions from that. So everything down to that point is going to like splinter off where your ideals are, and that will cause that division. So if, well, actually, this atheism is a poor example for that, but let's say I'm a Republican. Well, what does Republican mean? It means this, this, and this. Well, okay, I think it's this, this, and this, and you believe it's that, that, and that. They're both technically true, because both groups are part of the Republican banner, but because it's slightly different, you're going to start splitting off into a separate group, and that's going to cause you to disassociate within that group. And eventually, if the differences are so long, so great, you're going to go, okay, well, I'm no longer a Republican. I'm just something different.
Yeah, Tea Party.
Yeah, that's
you've described the process.
I mean, that's the other old Democratic Party for years, is that no matter how viciously we would fight each other, at the drop of a hat, we'd show a united front.
Well, and just think about that on the individual level.
Favorite quote from Will Rogers. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him. Long time ago guy.
Yeah.
He said, "I am not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat."
Well,
you don't get it. Okay.
Well, no, if you take that idea of the splitting off,
old Abe Lincoln,
and starting to calling yourself a new label, and then take that back to the individual level of just two individuals, well, what you're going to find is that if you keep on saying that I'm a Republican, I'm a Republican, I'm a Republican, and your friend keeps on saying they're a Republican, and then one day you have a conversation about what those things are, you find out that your entire relationship might be based on a completely, like, not a lie, but misinformation, because you were coming at it from two different places. And that is where the divide happens between friendships or in groups or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a person says he's a Republican because he thought about it. Just as you say a person says he's an atheist because he thought about it. Well, he doesn't just arbitrarily pick a label and say I like it. They both have looked, hopefully, at a certain set of concepts that they think are, generally the idea is that a Republican is supposed to be a conservative and a Democrat is supposed to be a liberal. But going back to that joke when he said, he basically was saying Democrats are not an organized political party. And that can change too. Excuse me. At the time he said it, which was in the 30s, I think it's still true today. The Democrats are less in agreement on a lot of things than the Republicans are on the same things. It seems to be that Republicans have a tighter organization and unity than the Democrats do.
Well, it's also because there's a difference in ideology there. Along the political spectrum, someone who is there's someone that is progressive, and then there's someone that is liberal. Progressive means that you are for change in small amounts where you think that there are reasons to have that change. Whereas liberal more means that, hey, we can change this, let's do it. And when you have that's a competing ideology, but it's along the same bend. You're going to agree in some areas because, changing the school system might be good, but just changing it for changing its sake is bad, and so you get that clash there. Where,
so, are you telling me that you're a Republican?
No.
No.
Okay. So you're arguing from outside. But you know what? I feel that I have successfully diverted from the concept that everything has an absolute perfect answer, which can be determined mathematically or with an algorithm, to, you know what? There really are people who have different ideas based on the same facts, and each one of those ideas could be valid. It requires a combination of, sure, logic, but also testing.
This
Example.
comes back to, strangely enough, to Stephen Molyneux, because the one time I saw him before Thunderfoot's video was he did pretty much a hack job on Abraham Lincoln. I didn't watch the whole of it, but lots of the facts he was citing were true. But if you arrange them differently and talk about them differently, you do get a whole different old Abe.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
Well, I mean, he didn't mention. I mean, if you're going to talk about Abraham Lincoln, if you're going to do anything seriously, you have to mention how much he loved humor, how much humor was part of his life.
Yeah.
And some historians have done this, and Molyneux, as far as I know, at 20 minutes in, I gave up. So that felt like a hatchet job, and so if he's going to do a hatchet job on old Abraham Lincoln, Pissant Thunderfoot's going to come and do one on you, baby.
Well, I'm not so sure that Thunderfoot is the guy for that job, but
okay, that's another show.
But and you're right, because that was a hit piece. But anyway, I'm glad you brought up Molyneux, because that was part of my thought process today, because I was thinking about his against me argument, and that's part of what got me thinking about the topic for this hangout tonight. Is I started thinking about that in terms of, as I mentioned, the tenuous relationships that we sometimes have with people, both maybe here in the in-group on YouTube, but also in our regular everyday lives. This sort of don't ask, don't tell, uneasy truths sometimes that we have. We know that, if we start talking about certain subjects, it may get into really dicey territory. So we kind of just don't say anything. We don't delve into those aspects. But how important are our values to us, and how dearly do we hold these concepts? And I was relating it to his against me argument. Would you, he says, would you condone the use of force against me for disagreeing with you? But that sort of, as hyperbolic as that is the way he uses it, there is a lot of truth to that, in terms of how we relate to one another when we really, really, really disagree strongly on things, and what is our capacity to transform that into discourse and remain peaceable and still remain cordial, and human to one another, and still maintain some sort of an adherence to what we hold dear. It's kind of an interesting.
Well, go ahead.
I'm sort of having this issue currently with someone that I talked to on here. I don't like blocking anyone, but this guy to me is so disrespectful that I'm just like, no, it's not worth it. I can't. It's like I would just stay away from you, but we're in the same circles, so I have to do this or else. And that thing right there is kind of like the most important thing outside of like free speech and free expression, is you have to be respectful. You have to allow people to talk. You have to allow people to actually express their opinion back to you. And if you don't do that, you're not showing them respect, and it's so irritating that it's like, I just can't stand that. And so that's the breaking point for me.
Depends on what they say. It very much depends on what they say, how long I'm going to give them respect, though. There are many things that you could say that will instantly get a fun reaction from me.
Well, no, it's like what I classify.
Oh, well,
what
the
classify
Holocaust
as
didn't happen. If somebody says that, no, I'm not going to be respectful to them anymore. Or if somebody says, oh, what's happening in Syria doesn't matter, I'm not going to be respectful to them anymore. If somebody says, oh, well, evolution is a lie, I'm not going to be respectful to you anymore. I mean,
my attitude towards that is, if I suddenly veer off into crazy land, I want somebody to tell me in not uncertain terms, hey, dude, you're not thinking right here, you know?
There's something that you have to be listened to be told that. So if I start saying something like, I don't know, let me think of something crazy. Okay.
Like there's a perfect answer for everything.
No, hey.
If I say something crazy and like, or if I start saying something and I get halfway through a sentence and I'm still talking and I'm going to explain what I just said so that you'll understand it. If you cut me off right at the point where I'm saying something like, for example, a lot of Christians and theists will do this. If I say the word fuck, you just shut me off automatically right there. That's disrespectful to me. And
no,
when you
but
do
saying
that,
the word fuck
well,
to me is
if you say
disrespectful.
you use that word, so that's disrespectful to them.
But when you shut people off there and then you just like go back over it, you can't explain why they're wrong. Because you don't know why they're wrong because you haven't heard their argument. So
Because you blew it when you said the word fuck. Seriously. You couldn't control your attempt to be reasonable long enough to control your language.
All right, Steve, I gotta go. It's late here. Thanks for hanging out, Mike. I appreciate it. You hang in there, baby.
All right, Bubbly. Take care, bud.
It's sort of like, you know, if they're saying that and then turn around and say you can't say that, that's one thing. But you know, you should go into these conversations with like, oh, okay, there are a few atheists that I stopped listening to because they feel that they need to use those offensive words. There's even one who says, so what? Well, you know, if you're handing them a reason to reject you, how can you complain that they rejected you? You know? How can you say, well, it's my...
Is that reciprocated?
Well, it depends. Let's say, like, I try to never use the F word. And it's easy for me because I never heard it growing up. So yeah, there's a good point there. You know, parents who go around swearing all the time and then are shocked when their kids start swearing, you know, they got a real problem. But you know, if you manage to if you're going to do a civil debate, you should try to do it at the same level of respectful language as they are. And if they feel that those certain words are disrespectful, then you're not really trying to communicate.
Let me see if I can.
And is that being reciprocated by them? That's the question. And I'll help you. No, it's not.
Yeah, let me try to. I understand what you're saying, but there's slightly different situation I think that you have in mind versus what I'm having in mind. The reaction that is disrespectful isn't that they'll just shut you off. Like, if I heard the word fuck and I was like, as a Christian, and I would go, okay, please stop right there. would you please not use that word with me around? That's respectful. And then if I continue to use that word, then it's disrespectful. But
I agree.
what I'm talking about is if I say that and then you just shut off completely and you say, no, your argument's completely invalid, I'm not going to listen to you. And that's where the problem. That's disrespectful.
You're right. I mean, they were looking for that.
Yeah.
Which is where I brought up that, you kind of handed them something that you should have expected them to be looking for. So I'm not saying that you were wrong. I'm saying you made, let's call it, a tactical mistake. Okay? If you know or even have an inkling that these folks are going to react to that, then you should know not to give them that opportunity. Or perhaps the other side of that is that you were goading them into doing that, and then you can claim the win that, oh, see that? They just shut up. They just shut me up. They cut me off. I win. You see what I'm saying? It can be looked at those two different ways. It can be either an accident, in which case you should say, whoops, you know what? You guys don't do that. I won't do that. Or it could be an intentional.
Implicit in what you're talking about is the idea between that we're actually having debate. This happens in regular conversations, and that's more what I'm going for. Like in a debate, I completely agree with you that would just adding fuel to the fire, adding something that they can use against you, and you shouldn't use words like that. But and that's just from a tactical point of view. But it's not like if you're just having a conversation and you suddenly just use it because even if it's an emotional ejaculation, which is what it is, and they're just like, no, your arguments, everything you've said is invalid. It's like, no, you can't just do that.
Oh yeah, I know. Now you're talking about the idea that it suddenly became, I don't care about your argument. I care that you have this. You have no character. So it's an ad hominem.
Yeah, it's like I don't care about you as a person and what you think. And it's like, oh, well, if you don't care about me as a person, then you're kind of saying that that's where the disrespect comes in. It's like, I don't know how to explain it, because respect is one of those weird words that means different things to different people. But
getting back to this whole in-group thing, if you're modifying your behavior in order to be cared for as a person, then you're making a mistake. Now we can get into this, sort of Molyneux territory of, that means that you're a terrible person. I say, I'm exaggerating here. I know, hyperbole, but the point is that you're not a terrible person. You made a mistake, a temporary mistake, and so again, the person who jumps on this temporary mistake as a tactic and then says that he can dismiss anything you say from that point on is cheating.
No, I would agree with that. That's a pretty low blow, really.
Yeah.
It's certainly not done in the interest of actual discourse, right? Reasonable discourse. It's a cheap shot. It's a cheap shot. Like I said, I'm less susceptible to that particular cheap shot because it has not become a part of my vocabulary. But I have known people, drill sergeants. The Army came out with a thing that said, drill sergeants, basic training, first time a person enters the Army. And you've probably seen the movies with R. Lee Remy, where the drill sergeants just cuss up a storm. And they're used to it. And then the Army came out and said, you know what? You can't swear at trainees anymore. You swear at a trainee, we'll bust you. There were two people who were absolutely scared to death because they could not say one sentence without using the F word twice. And one was a male and one was a female.
It just is their habit. You know, the word, it's like a comma to them. Their punctuation.
Yeah, I've known a few people who punctuate. Yeah, who
Yeah.
punctuate like that.
So that's not a good idea to get into a debate with somebody if that's you know, that strong a habit with you. You know, it's good for chewing out trainees, but it's not a good way to get your point across in a debate with a college professor.
Yeah,
You know,
Draken,
so
that person that you're referring to, would that be considered sort of in group? The person you're currently going through this with?
Not with me, because I don't really have an in-group, but
Well,
in
yeah.
group within the circle of people that hang out with on these Google Hangouts, sure.
Right, right.
But then again, so is G-Man and some of these other people that I have never talked to.
That's a pretty broad. Yeah, it's a pretty
Yeah.
broad. Yeah, that's a pretty broad group. Yeah.
But this whole respect issue is kind of important to the entire thing. Also with your entire personality, George, if you're not willing to say something to someone, then you have a level of disrespect for them. If I'm not willing to say that you're wrong or you're crazy or you're mistaken in some places, then you obviously do not think that they're able to handle being wrong. And
isn't
that
that
to
what
me
I
is
said?
disrespectful.
Isn't that what I've been saying all along?
And to put it to the whole in-group, out-group thing, or even in the in-group thing where we're talking, is like, if we're suddenly revealing that I didn't talk to you about this beforehand, and now I am, well, that means that there was something that you felt that I couldn't handle, and I don't think that that was appropriate given our levels of friendship together or whatever.
And yet again, I have never argued for that point as you're describing it now. I have never, and right now tonight, I have not said that I would hold back in order to maintain a friendship.
No, I'm relating it to the actual topic of what we're discussing.
Yeah, and so we're in 100% agreement.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is like, and that's why people sort of fall apart from that issue too, is because there's a difference in the relationship there. Because
Okay, yeah. Going back to the concept of how strong is my desire to be in the in group, and how far will I go to remain in this in group? Yeah, people do that.
It's not always a matter of trying to remain in an in-group though either, because you know there's peripherals too, right? So if you think of it in terms of your personal life, you may not even wish to be a part of an in-group, but you may face some sort of peripheral ostracization, right? If you
like family.
See what I'm saying?
You know. Sure,
family
sure.
or business associates or customers or neighbors, right?
Oh, I have a perfect example of that. I'm not going to go around wearing a T-shirt that says I'm an atheist, because I'm not looking to provoke a fight. And yet, if the conversation comes up, I'll go ahead and say my piece. But I don't go looking for a fight. And so if I I had one aunt who was definitely very, very, very Southern Baptist, I guess, could kind of describe it well enough. And at one point, while she was visiting my mother here in this very house that I'm in now, I'm house sitting, but at one point she said, "That's heresy." And I said, "Aunt, let's see, it was Aunt Avis. Yeah, Aunt Avis, heresy is just another opinion." And she said nothing. That was the only time I ever, with any family member, took up anything controversial. when my father said, you know, George, I guess I was about 15, 16, he said, you know, George, you should become a preacher. I said nothing. So that was the one case where, you know, I chose not to pick a fight.
So,
And go ahead.
do you think that we do this in the sort of the more general, broad sense of it in our personal lives, sort of setting aside YouTube and Google Plus because it's kind of different, right? We come here for discourse, which is why it disappoints me sometimes all the more when people do this kind of attack. But do you think that we do this in our normal lives out of a self-preservation, or is it more of for a sense of social cohesion, or are we just weak? You know, are we not able to handle the disagreements, the differences in ideology? You know, like mature adults. You know what I mean?
It could be a case of not enough time. You know, if I'm heading out the door, hey, we're at a party. Okay, we're at a party. We're all drinking or not drinking according to each to his own and stuff like that. And it's time to go home, and all of a sudden somebody brings up something highly controversial, and you just don't have time for it. You know?
Yeah, but we do it. This protection of, you know, of the don't ask, don't tell policy, a lot more broadly and a lot more consistently than that, I think.
Yeah, that's a real good point.
People in general, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of what we're doing, right?
Yeah, it's kind of what we're doing
It's
now.
an uneasy truce, you know. Let's just not talk about it.
Yeah, there's also a matter of appropriateness to the conversation. Kind of like that whole respect thing, but not quite. Like, it's the good side of that, where you modify your language to fit the circumstance. When it's actually the case that someone is, like, beneath you or above you. For example, if you're talking to a child, you would modify your language because you are talking to someone that is technically beneath you in some way, probably. And you would think that talking to someone that's older, they would have more information and be wiser, or whatever you want to call it.
That's true. So, older people are wiser. Remember that.
But you would want to modify your language, and that shows a level of respect based on that.
Yes, show me as much respect as the Chinese do. I demand it. Yeah, you got a point. You got a good point. Let's see. What was this thing I thought of? Okay, Facebook. Two friends, one of whom I met in China, a Filipino. Really great, super wonderful guy. And the other was the guy I was closest to in high school and college for the first year. Lives in my hometown, Dan. And then both these guys are on Facebook. Caruso from the Philippines and Dan. And Caruso is suddenly putting out 3 or 4 or 5 different religiously inspiring things per day, sometimes by guys that you and I, the three of us, would recognize as outright crackpots. Some guy, Hagee, and who is that charismatic guy, young guy, you know, God wants you to be rich guy? I forget. When he started putting out stuff like that, instead of getting into some big-time fight with him, because right now I believe he's in Korea, I just unfriended him, and that's that. I didn't make a big battle over it. Then my friend from high school, I had no idea what his politics were. We never discussed politics. But all of a sudden, he posts, and he rarely posts, all of a sudden he posts a repeated, vaguely racist Tea Party type comment. And again, I just quietly unfriended him on Facebook, said nothing more about it. I thought that was the correct way to handle it because, not out of cowardice, but because I just don't want to fight that fight with some guy who, you know, I don't want to fight the fight. And it's not cowardice. You know, to call it cowardice is ridiculous. It's just, I don't, care enough to make it an issue.
Yeah, there's also some things out there that just don't matter at the time. Like, I'll give you an example. I think last year, is it last year? I think it was last year. My grandfather was gonna have a heart bypass thing, and he was, or it was the year before last, one of the two, and like he brought up that he was taking homeopathic drugs, like whatever, and like he had gone to the doctor, and the doctor was saying whatever they were okay. Like, I could have stopped there and been like, whoa, let's stop talking about this homeopathic stuff. It's complete nonsense. But there was this other thing that was more important going on, which is preparing for the heart surgery. It's like, okay, is this affecting that? No? Okay, well, I don't care about that right now. Let's deal with the actual issue at hand. And so you kind of just push it off to the side and ignore it for a while, even though at times you want to be like, oh, I want to strangle you. Taking part in some stupid, crazy
very soon later date. Yeah, maybe as soon as possible, you can get into the, hey, is this doctor himself a homeopath? In which case, maybe you ought to consider an osteopath or an MD, But the immediate situation is not, oh, let's get in a fight over this. It's, hey, let's not cause a heart attack right now. Good point. Yeah, so really, Mike, it does come down to, do I care enough? And so, yeah, you could, not you, generalized you. One, any person could attack me and say, you're wrong for not caring enough. In which case I can say, no, that's not my priority right now. Okay? I have other priorities. And you need to grant people the right to have other priorities.
Yeah, the charge of cowardice is something is just a cop out anyway. It's really I mean, because it assumes facts that a person can't even know, right?
Yeah, and then there's also situations where you want to put up a stand, but you can't put up a stand. I'll give you an example. A few years ago at Christmas time, there's a thing that my family does where they pass this wafer around for religious reasons. And you break off a piece of the wafer, and then you eat that, and whatever. Well, they were passing the wafer around a few years ago, and I didn't break it off. I just passed it along. I didn't make a big deal of it, but then my grandma was like, take a piece. I was like, no. Like, take a piece. No. And after that point, it was just fine. I put the stand there. It went on. I mean, there was a little bit of conflict, but it went on, and I didn't reveal, like, this is why I'm saying no. This is, like, it wasn't necessary. It's just, you don't need to know that. You just need to know that I'm rejecting this.
Okay. So. Now that we're in confession time, and you didn't confess, but you've gotten me in a confessing mood. I've made this bold statement that I never modify my behavior to be with an in-group. Actually, I do need to qualify that by saying when I'm on YouTube or when I'm on some political site that I like to go to or something like that. And Mike is right in bringing up, well, don't you do that sometimes for family? And you know what? You're absolutely right, Mike. It took a little while for this to come back into my head, but here's something that happened a couple of times actually, but recently too. Okay, I am here in Michigan, house sitting and cat sitting, and part of what happens, last time I came here it was to help my sister through a medical thing, and both times though, she immediately wants me to go with her to have dinner at one of the local restaurants with her two closest friends, none of whom are well off financially. and one of whom is a very devout Seventh-day Adventist. So here's a little deception that she devised both times. She handed me the cash in advance and said, George, you use this cash to pay for the dinner because they're not that well off. I can afford it, but if they think I paid for it, they will refuse. Okay? They're not going to take charity from me. But if you, as you know, the visitor to this town, are being generous to my sister and her friends, then that's cool, and nobody will complain. And so I went along with this total deception. My sister paid for it because I wasn't going to be dishonest enough on the one hand to actually pay for it. You know, these are not my friends. And if it's their idea, you know, go Dutch, as they say, or used to say. But this is the way my sister wanted it, so I went through with this deception with her, and everybody was happy. But the more important point here is about the religious aspect. And as I've said to anybody who was in a listening mood about the subject, I was never really a Christian. I was never really religious, but I would go through the motions as a sort of a kid is expected to do. And one habit that carried into adulthood, and the first time I actually caught myself at it was at that thing where this, again, I was told that the woman is devoutly Seventh-day Adventist, and that she does things like pray before we eat. Now, I could have probably gotten away with just not even going through the motions of prayer. You know, the wafer thing, you were actually forced to, you know, do something physical, either eat it or don't eat it, and people noticed. Me, I could have just sat there while this woman had her head bowed and her eyes closed and her hands folded and all of that stuff, and she would probably not have noticed that I didn't participate. But I went through the deception far enough to look like I was participating. She bowed her head and you know, whatever with the hands, and I did the same. And here's where I really caught myself back 6 months ago. For the first time, I realized, you know what? Every time this happened in the past, I sort of felt like an antenna. It was like it was my duty to hear the words, understand the words, and somehow sort of retransmit them. Yeah, these are your words to God, and I'm just, you know, reinforcing that, like adding another, you know, amplifier to the system. And I realized, you know what? I never, you know, that's not right. So this time I went through the motions but didn't carry out the mental activity. And that was like the first time, and that was only earlier this year. Amazed myself with that. Because like before, I wasn't really, as you said, a pure atheist. It was like, maybe there's a God. Wouldn't hurt to, you know, echo what somebody else is saying. This time I said, you know what, there is no God.
Similar to the wafer, it took me quite a number of years to stop. My grandma, whenever she would come to visit, would always say to me as she was leaving, "Say God bless me." And I did this very uneasy, you know, reciting of that, you know, very uncomfortable, very awkward, strained. And then finally, I just got to the point where I said, "God bless you."
Yeah.
She was saying, "God bless me," so yes, God bless you, Grandma.
Good on you. How about the sneezing thing? What do you guys do? What do you guys do when someone sneezes?
I don't do anything.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, I do the colloquial "bless you," but it's not. Obviously, that's just to me, that's a colloquialism. It's not obviously not a religious. Yeah.
Like
It's actually a superstitious thing, but
yeah, we know that. I'm sure we all know that. You know, like when somebody texts OMG, you know, they don't really mean it. But there's another bit where I could say I was lucky, is that I don't know, I guess it's where I'm from. It might be regional or whatever, but instead of that, it was always Gesundheit.
Right, right.
Yeah. So somebody sneezes, you say Gesundheit. And now, Mike, you're of the Chinese persuasion. They say nothing. You know, somebody sneezes in China, another Chinese person will say nothing. It's like, you know, it's an embarrassment that it happened, kind of thing.
Don't acknowledge it. Yeah.
Yeah, don't acknowledge it. So, yeah, Gesundheit has always been fine with me, you know, for the same superstitious reason, I know, when you get into it, but really it's all just a habit. It's a cultural thing.
I don't know about you guys, but whenever I'm sort of put in a position where to make things easier, you have to lie, but I don't really like lying at all. Like, that to me is really, really uncomfortable, and it always, like, makes me so mad, but I can't express it in my head. It's like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do it just to get along, and it's not worth the fight. But it's so against what I stand for, so everything, because it's like, it's a lie. Why should I lie? Like,
you're talking about the white lies. You're looking
even
good.
if it's a white lie, or even if it's like a big lie, it doesn't matter. I don't like any lying whatsoever. I try not to lie, and even if it's a white lie that even I accept as like, okay, this is fully justified, I'm thinking, this is so wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. I just don't like it. It goes against that ideology.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way you do. Even about the white lies, even though I sort of recognize that they're sort of, you know, they're doing more good than harm, or they're protecting somebody or whatever, I still prefer not, and I do as little of that as possible.
Yeah, those two, you know, if we want to get back to this moral, you know, what is moral? Moral is that which produces more good, and you have a problem with this concept of white lies. Do they do more good? And I actually generally tend to go with yeah. Hey, how do I look? Oh, you look great. To me, that's like saying, well, you look the best you can, and unless you're gonna, you know, wait a year, you know, unless you got a year to, you know, lose 100 pounds, you know, is that what I'm, you know, is that the better approach? How do I look? Well, I tell you what, you go exercise and on a strict diet for a year, then you'll look great. Or I can say, yeah, you look great, meaning you look as good as you can right now.
There's only one correct answer to that question.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the sound of a closing door. I mean, just walk away.
Or a flying dish.
I think that twinge is part of that ideological thing that's going on there. I don't think everyone has that twinge when it comes to lying, and that's something I think we can relate there. But funny enough, I think it would be interesting what would happen if you were put in that moral position of where the Nazis are coming and look on the door and asking for what's her name. It's like, would you lie about a Jew hiding up in the closet or whatever?
Anne Frank in your attic, yes or no? No.
Well, and of course that ends up in sort of lifeboat scenario territory, right? But yet it's a legitimate one, I think.
Yeah.
You know, far more legitimate than the rape a baby, save a planet bullshit. But But the thing is, you are interspersing a couple of moral things there, right? So you could be saying that you're acting in an extremity of self-defense on behalf of Anne Frank by lying, because you know that you're protecting. You know, so it's not just lying in and of itself is not the only moral factor in that equation, right?
Yeah, we're back to a greater good, a much greater good of saving life.
I think it would be interesting to observe whether you would actually have that twinge at that moment or not.
Actually, it's
that
more
discomfort about lying.
That might be more a question of courage or the ability to pull it off, you know, because probably there's a good chance that the guy who's asking you that question is watching your face to see how you process the question. And, I could do my damnedest to lie to this guy, and he'd catch me because I have to think about it. There are people who train that's their profession, is catching liars who, are stuck with this kind of quandary.
Sure,
Because
sure.
they wait too long or don't wait long enough.
Or
answer.
just other
Yeah.
ticks or whatever, right? Because some people have a better, what do they call it? Social intelligence or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you've seen it. There's probably an American counterpart, because usually these shows start in the UK or the US,
Mhm.
and then we get them here. But there's a show on right now called Canada's Smartest Person, I think it is.
Ah.
And they've divided intelligence into 7 or so categories: musical
Mhm.
intelligence, logical intelligence, social intelligence, and actually they just did one that was a test. Now, it was completely bogus, I think, the way they did it, but there's no other way to do it for television. They had one guy tell several different stories, and the contestants all had to watch him and then guess as to whether, which story was true and which story was false. And everybody's got different social intelligence, even to a very good liar, I think, because I think this guy actually did a reasonably good job when he was lying.
Mhm.
But some people are more perceptive than others at that. But certainly your ability to pull it off would be, in the Anne Frank, situation, would be critical.
Mhm.
But the tick, however, I'm not sure the tick necessarily translates into poor delivery.
Yeah.
You still might be
Well,
good
yeah,
at it.
well, one of the things that these experts on such things say is you can't really look at a person for the very first time and tell whether they're lying or not. You have to be able to observe them over a long enough period of time to know whether or not maybe they do have a nervous tick in one eye, or maybe whatever.
It's hard to say, because I think that discounts just intuition, because I've had this before. In fact, I've typically been a very good read of people on first meeting, at least when they are people of questionable moral character.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Then there's that other part. If all sorts of things add up, if it's just the one, and it's the
Complex,
first time.
yeah.
But when you see all sorts of, what are they doing with their face, their hands, their legs, their feet, and then there's the old bit about, your arms are crossed. Does that mean you don't like me? No, I'm just cold and I'm holding my bathrobe together. That sort of thing. So yeah, situation dependent can be part of it, and the complexity, the whole person, the whole body, the tone of voice. Nothing shows on the body but the tone of voice. Be wrong. Things like that. Yeah. All of that. But still, so now we're off onto, can you be caught at it? That's a factor, but back to the morality of it, I would definitely go with the greater good is to say, no, she's not there, and hope I can get away with it.
What I
And
think is interesting, just getting back to the topic of this, the original topic, is how, when we're dealing with the subject of morality, how interesting it is too, the sort of in-group attacks that take place when we actually, I think we share a lot more agreement on the actual moral precepts than we do on how we got there. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting as well.
that is interesting. But where I do have a problem still with people in arguments on YouTube or elsewhere is with the uses of such phrases as ad hominem, straw man, red herring. Sometimes it seems to me that if you teach a person a new word or whatever, or a word just suddenly sort of comes in vogue across the whole expanse of YouTube, then everybody wants to use it. And of course, the other problem like that, as you mentioned before, is this concept of reciprocity. So it's easy to call the other guy a hypocrite, or to say, oh, that's an ad hominem attack, when you're doing it yourself and you don't even realize it. And I'm not trying to make that an accusative thing. I'm trying to say that, we can recognize things in others that we don't recognize in ourselves. And there also tends to be a kind of concept where, it's the word of the day, the week, the month, that
Well,
we're
and
looking
that's
for a chance to use it, kind of,
that's
almost.
true, and I've seen that accusation leveled at people, that same frustration, I should say, that and that makes it difficult for someone who's legitimately pointing out an actual ad hominem or an actual red herring, because those are fallacious and they don't further the discourse. So it's kind of
And
tough.
that's the immediate reaction. Well, you're using a fallacious argument. No, you're using a fallacious. No, you.
Yeah, it's a matter of teach a dog to bark for food, and you're gonna have a noisy fucking house.
Yeah, true enough. Well, guys, I think to keep this reasonable in length, I think we'll stop the broadcast there.
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. Actually, do you want to stick around, George?
Sure.
Okay. Thanks very much, Draken, for coming in. Your contribution was fantastic. I really appreciate it.
By the way, whatever you say, whether you think I'm right or wrong, I am right. Just to let you know.
And I must be respected, as I'm wise. I can be wrong, but wise. It's possible.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.